The cardiac monitor's rhythm had changed 3 times in the past hour, and Claire Hensley knew what that meant. She'd been a nurse at Presbyterian Hospital in Charlotte, North Carolina for 11 years, long enough to recognize the sound of a body beginning its surrender. Room 408 smelled like antiseptic and something else, something heavier. The man in the bed wasn't sleeping. His eyes were open, fixed on the ceiling tiles, counting them perhaps, or simply avoiding the faces of the 5 people arranged around him like pieces on a chessboard. None of them knew how to play. "The lawyers are waiting downstairs," his daughter said. Victoria Cross sat nearest the window, her Chanel suit still crisp despite the 6-hour flight from San Francisco. She hadn't touched her father's hand once since arriving. "They need you to sign before I die." David Cross's voice came out as gravel. At 73, he'd built Cross Media Group from a single radio station in Asheville into a communications empire worth $4 billion. Now he was a skeleton, wrapped in expensive pajamas, and the morphine drip wasn't quite enough anymore. Let them wait. Claire adjusted his IV with practiced efficiency. She'd learned not to get involved in family dynamics, especially not with the VIP patients on the 4th floor, where wealth bought private rooms and the illusion of control over the uncontrollable. But there was something about the silence in this room that felt like a held breath. "Mr. Cross, your pain level?" she asked. "Which kind?" He turned his head to look at her, and something in his expression made her pause. It wasn't pain, it was something closer to fury. "The cancer? Or the fact that my 3 children are circling like vultures trying to look mournful while they calculate their inheritance?" "Dad, that's not—" Michael, the younger son, stood near the door. He looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. "You flew in from Dubai yesterday," David interrupted. "First time you've visited in 2 years. You think I don't know you're only here because Victoria called you?" He coughed, and the sound rattled through the room. Claire reached for the water cup, but he waved it away. "And you, James, when did you last call? Christmas?" "No, wait. That was your assistant who called." James Cross sat in the corner, his Wall Street Journal folded in his lap. 51 years old, David's eldest, and the only one who looked genuinely uncomfortable. "I've been managing the quarterly reports. Someone has to keep the company running while I'm dying," David finished. "You can say it, the word won't kill me faster." Claire made a notation on her tablet. His blood pressure was elevated, not dangerous yet, but climbing. "Mr. Cross, I need you to try to stay calm. Your heart rate—" "My heart is the least of my problems, nurse. It's been broken for years." He said it flatly, without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. "You know what the tragedy is? I spent my whole life building something, and I'm leaving it to 3 strangers who happen to share my DNA." Victoria stood abruptly. "If you're going to be dramatic, I'll wait outside." "Sit down." Something in his voice made her freeze. Claire had heard that tone before. It was the voice of someone who had nothing left to lose and had just decided to spend their last currency. Victoria sat. David looked at each of his children in turn, then at his lawyer, Martin Schaefer, who had been standing silently near the medical equipment like a grey ghost. "Martin, I'm making a change." "Sir, your will is very thorough. We spent months. I don't care. I'm changing it now." Claire felt the temperature in the room drop. She should leave. This was beyond her professional boundary. But David's blood pressure monitor beeped a warning, and she couldn't leave until it stabilized. "You can't be serious," James said. "I've never been more serious in my life." David's breathing was labored now. "Here's what's going to happen. I'm leaving $1 to each of you. The rest, every share of Cross Media, every property, every asset, goes into a charitable trust." Victoria's face went white. "You're joking." "Do I look like I'm joking?" Michael stepped forward. "Dad, please, whatever we've done, it's not what you've done. It's what you haven't done." You haven't been my children. You've been my employees, my competitors, my strangers. His eyes, clouded with pain and medication, were suddenly sharp. I'm tired of pretending we're a family. Claire watched James's hands grip the armrests of his chair. She'd seen families implode in hospital rooms before, but never quite like this. The silence that followed David's declaration was absolute. Then David turned to her. Nurse Hensley, do you sing? The question was so unexpected that Claire nearly dropped her tablet. What? Simple question. Do you sing? I used to, in church when I was younger. Then I have a proposition for you. David's smile was thin but genuine. If you can sing something, anything that actually moves me, I'll add a codicil to my will. $500,000, right now. The room erupted. This is insane, Victoria said. She's a nurse, James added. She can't. David held up one skeletal hand, and everyone fell silent. It's my money, my deathbed, my rules. He looked at Claire. What do you say, Nurse Hensley? Want to earn 6 months of your salary in 3 minutes? Claire felt every eye in the room on her. Her shift ended in 20 minutes. Her daughter Emma was waiting at home, probably doing homework at the kitchen table, wondering why Mom was late again. $500,000 would pay off their mortgage, would pay for Emma's college, would mean Claire could finally stop working double shifts. But this felt wrong. All of it. Mr. Cross, I don't think... I'm dying, he interrupted. Probably tonight, maybe tomorrow morning. I want one honest moment before I go. Not lawyers, not fake grief, not my children's barely concealed relief that they won't have to pretend to care anymore. His voice cracked just slightly. I want to feel something real. Can you give me that? Claire looked at the monitor. His heart rate was 102. Blood pressure, 1 to 58/94. She should call Dr. Patterson. She should decline politely and leave the room. She should do anything except what she was about to do. But she saw something in David Cross's eyes that made her throat tight. Not manipulation, not cunning, just exhaustion. The exhaustion of a man who had built an empire and realized too late that he'd built it on sand. What do you want me to sing? She asked. David closed his eyes. Anything that moves me, that's the deal. You've got one shot. Claire set down her tablet. Her hands were shaking. She hadn't sung in public since her husband died 4 years ago, since the funeral where she'd stood at the podium and couldn't make sound come out. Music had felt like a betrayal then, a frivolous thing in the face of grief. But she thought about Emma, about the scholarship applications they'd been filling out, about the notices from the bank. And she thought about this dying man who had everything except what mattered. She opened her mouth, and before she could second-guess herself, she began to sing. No accompaniment, no preparation, just her voice, slightly rough from years of disuse, carrying a melody she'd learned from her grandmother. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound! It wasn't a performance. It was something rawer than that. Each note came out like a confession, like the truth she'd been holding inside since Matt died. About loss, about continuing, about the strange, terrible beauty of surviving. That saved a wretch like me. She sang it slow, slower than it was usually done. Let each word stretch out until it meant something beyond religion, beyond tradition. Until it was just about falling and being caught, about being lost and maybe found. When she finished, the room was absolutely still. Claire opened her eyes. She hadn't realized she'd closed them. Her heart was pounding, not from nervousness, but from something else. The strange catharsis of finally letting that song out after 4 years of keeping it locked inside. The silence stretched. Victoria had frozen mid-reach for her phone. James's Wall Street Journal had slipped from his lap to the floor. Michael was staring at Claire like she'd somehow materialized from another dimension. and David Cross had tears running down his weathered cheeks. Not just tears. His entire body seemed to have released something. His shoulders had dropped, his jaw unclenched. Even his breathing had changed. The cardiac monitor showed his heart rate decreasing, settling into a steadier rhythm. "Dad?" Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. David didn't respond to her. He was looking at Claire with an expression she couldn't quite read. Recognition, maybe, or relief. "When did your husband die?" he asked, his voice rough. The question caught Claire off guard. 4 years ago, lymphoma. And you stopped singing." It wasn't a question. "Yes, but you just did. For me, a stranger." He closed his eyes briefly. "Do you know what that cost you?" Claire felt something crack open in her chest. "Do you know what it cost you to ask?" David laughed, a short, painful sound. "Everything. Nothing. I don't know anymore." He looked at his children. "Did any of you feel that? What just happened?" Victoria's face was pale. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months." David's eyes, clouded with pain medication, but somehow sharp, fixed on each of his children. "She gave me 3 minutes of truth, something none of you have managed in 3 years. "Martin," he whispered, "get the paperwork." $500,000 to Claire Hensley. "Do it now." Victoria stood so quickly, her chair fell backward. "This is unacceptable. She's taking advantage. She's the only honest person in this room." David's voice was weak now, fading. "The only one who gave me something real." James was on his phone already, probably calling his lawyer. Michael just stared at Claire like she'd performed a magic trick. Claire felt disconnected from her body. What had she just done? "Mr. Cross, I can't accept." "It's done," he said. "Thank you, Nurse Hensley. You have a beautiful voice, and you've just given my children something to really be angry about." He smiled, and for the first time since Claire had met him 3 weeks ago, he looked almost at peace. "Now get out of here, all of you. I'm tired." Claire gathered her things with numb hands. As she left the room, she heard Victoria on her phone. "I don't care what time it is in New York. I need you to contest this. Now." The hospital corridor felt surreal. Fluorescent lights. The distant sound of a television. Someone's IV machine beeping. Normal. Everything was normal. Except Claire's life had just changed in the space of 3 minutes, and she had no idea what it meant. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emma. "Mom, when are you coming home?" Claire stared at the message, then at room 408's closed door. Behind it, a billionaire was dying, and his family was tearing itself apart. And somehow, impossibly, she was now part of it. She typed back, "Soon, honey, soon." But as she walked toward the nurse's station, Claire knew that nothing would be soon. Nothing would be simple. She'd just stepped into something that was going to follow her long after David Cross took his last breath. The cardiac monitor in room 408 changed rhythm again. Claire stopped walking. Then she kept going, because that's what nurses did. They kept going. The hospital's legal department called Claire into a meeting at 7 the next morning. She'd barely slept, had spent the night staring at her bedroom ceiling, replaying the moment over and over. The singing, David Cross's tears, Victoria's rage. Emma had asked why she seemed distracted during dinner. Claire had said work stuff and left it at that. How do you tell your 15-year-old daughter that you might have just inherited more money than either of them had ever imagined, and that it felt less like a gift and more like a grenade with the pin pulled? David Cross died at 4:47 a.m. Claire learned this from Dr. Patterson in the hallway outside the legal office. "He went peacefully," Patterson said, though his expression suggested the aftermath had been anything but. "The family is handling it." Claire could imagine what that meant. Inside the legal office, 2 hospital administrators and a lawyer named Rebecca Walsh were waiting. Walsh was younger than Claire expected, maybe 35, with the kind of sharp efficiency that suggested she'd been dealing with unusual situations her entire career. "Ms. Hensley, thank you for coming in." Walsh gestured to a chair. "I understand you had an unusual interaction with Mr. Cross yesterday evening." "Is that what we're calling it?" Claire sat down. She'd worn her oldest scrubs, the comfortable ones with a small stain near the pocket. She hadn't been thinking about impression management. Mr. Cross's attorney, Martin Schaefer, filed paperwork last night at 8:47 p.m., witnessed by 2 hospital staff members, a codicil to Mr. Cross's will, leaving you $500,000. Walsh slid a document across the table. "Did you solicit this gift?" Claire felt her stomach drop. "Solicit? No. He asked me to sing. I thought it was just a dying man's request. I didn't think he was serious about the money." "But you did sing?" "Yes." "After he mentioned the amount." Claire saw where this was going. "He asked if I sang. I said yes. Then he made the offer. I sang because—" She paused. Why had she sung? "Because he looked like he needed something human, something that wasn't about money or business or lawyers." One of the administrators, a man named Hughes, leaned forward. "Ms. Hensley, you understand this puts the hospital in a difficult position. Mr. Cross's children are alleging that you took advantage of their father in a vulnerable state. I didn't. They're also alleging that hospital staff may have facilitated this, that we allowed you unsupervised access to a patient with diminished capacity. His capacity was fine," Claire said sharply. "He was lucid. He knew exactly what he was doing." "Can you prove that?" Walsh asked. The question hung in the air. Claire thought about the chart notes. She documented his vital signs, his pain level, his refusal of additional medication. But she hadn't documented his mental state beyond the standard assessment. Why would she? He'd been sharp, angry, completely present. "The witnesses," Claire said. "His children were there. His lawyer. They all heard him." "His children," Hughes said slowly, "who have every reason to contest this and claim their father was not of sound mind." Claire felt the trap closing. "So you're saying I should refuse the inheritance?" "We're saying," Walsh replied carefully, "that this situation is complicated, and that if the Cross family decides to pursue legal action, it could involve both you personally and the hospital institutionally. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing yet. Don't speak to the media. Don't speak to any lawyers representing the Cross estate. Don't—" "Ms. Walsh!" A knock at the door. One of the hospital's security guards stood in the hallway. "There are reporters in the main lobby. They're asking for Claire Hensley." Claire's phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then started ringing. She looked at the screen. Unknown number. She declined the call. It rang again immediately. "How did they—" she started. "Martin Schaefer filed the paperwork with the county," Walsh said. "These things are public record, and the Cross family is high-profile enough that local news monitors the filings." She stood. "Ms. Hensley, I strongly advise you to retain legal counsel. The hospital will provide support, but you need personal representation." Claire felt like she was in a dream. Yesterday she'd been a nurse. Today she was. What? A news story? A legal liability? Her phone rang again. This time she answered. "Ms. Hensley." A woman's voice, professional but warm. "This is Jennifer Park from WCNC. I'm hoping to ask you a few questions about David Cross's will. Can you comment on—" Claire hung up. The phone rang immediately. Different number. Then another text. "Claire Hensley. We'd like to offer you an exclusive interview. We're prepared to pay—" She turned off her phone. "I need to go," she said. "My shift starts in an hour." "You're not working today," Hughes said. "We're placing you on paid administrative leave pending the resolution of this situation. You're suspending me. We're protecting you and the hospital. If you're on the floor, reporters will find a way to get to you. Families will ask questions. It's better if you're not here." Claire stood. Her hands were shaking again, just like they'd been before she sang. "I didn't do anything wrong. We know," Walsh said, though her tone suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "But perception matters, and right now, the perception is that a nurse inherited $500,000 from a patient, and his children are very, very angry about it." Walsh walked her to the door. "One more thing, Ms. Hensley. The media will try to find angles. They'll talk to your neighbors, your daughter's school, former colleagues. They'll paint you as either a saint or a villain. Be prepared for neither portrait to feel like you." Claire left the hospital through the emergency exit, avoiding the main lobby. But there were reporters there too, two of them with cameras, waiting by the employee parking lot. "Ms. Hensley, can you tell us about your relationship with David Cross? Did you know about the inheritance before he died? What did you sing?" A third reporter appeared from behind a van. "Ms. Hensley, David Cross's daughter Victoria just released a statement calling your actions predatory and unconscionable. Would you like to respond?" Claire kept her head down and got into her 10-year-old Honda Civic. The engine sputtered before starting. The battery was going, had been for months. She'd been saving up to replace it. Now she might be able to afford a new car entirely. Or she might lose everything and still have the dying battery. Normal. Everything was supposed to be normal, except her phone was ringing non-stop. And when she checked her Facebook, something she rarely did, there were already 3 friend requests from people she didn't know and 2 messages from high school acquaintances she hadn't spoken to in years. "Hey Claire, long time. Saw you on the news. That's crazy. We should catch up sometime." The subtext was obvious. Everyone wanted to be close to the money. She drove home in a daze. Their house in the University City neighborhood looked exactly the same. Small, brick, the front lawn needing mowing. Emma's bike was still on the porch where she'd left it last week. The azaleas Claire had planted with Matt were blooming. Late bloomers. He'd called them like them. Inside, Emma was eating cereal before school, scrolling through her phone. When Claire entered, Emma looked up and her face changed. "Mom, oh my God, Mom, it's everywhere. TikTok, Instagram, Twitter. There are already memes." She held up her phone. Someone had created a nurse versus billionaire's kids battle meme. "People are calling you the singing saint or the gold-digging angel, depending on which side they're on." "You're home early," Emma said. "Did you work all night again?" Claire set down her purse, looked at her daughter. Matt's eyes, her own stubborn chin. 15 years old and thinking about SAT prep and whether Jake Morrison liked her back and all the normal problems of a normal life that was about to become very, very abnormal. "Emma, something happened." Her daughter set down her phone, concerned now. "Are you okay? Did someone die?" "Yes, a patient, Mr. Cross." "The rich guy." Emma had heard about him. Claire had mentioned the VIP patient a few times. "That's sad." "He left me money. In his will." Emma's spoon stopped halfway to her mouth. "What? $500,000? The spoon clattered into the bowl. Milk splashed on the table. "Are you serious? Mom, that's insane. We're rich." Then her face shifted, processing. "Wait, is that why you're home? Mom, what happened? We're not rich. We're complicated." Claire sat down across from her daughter. "His family is contesting the will. There might be lawsuits. There are reporters outside the hospital. The hospital put me on leave." Emma's excitement faded completely. "Wait, you're in trouble." "I don't know. Maybe. Probably." Claire rubbed her face. "I sang for him. That's all I did. He asked me to sing, and I did, and he said it moved him, and now everything is a mess." "What did you sing?" "Amazing Grace." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then, "The song you sang at Dad's funeral, the one you couldn't finish." Claire nodded. She'd forgotten Emma remembered that. Or maybe she'd hoped Emma didn't, that her daughter had been too lost in her own grief at 11 years old to notice her mother's breaking. "So you finished it for a stranger?" "I guess so." Emma reached across the table and took her mother's hand. When had her daughter's hands gotten so big? When had she grown up enough to offer comfort instead of asking for it? When had the roles started to reverse, the way they always do eventually? "Mom, you didn't do anything wrong." "I know, but sometimes that doesn't matter." "No," Emma's voice was firm. "Listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. You sang a song. That's it. And if singing a song is worth $500,000 to someone, that's their decision, not yours." His children don't see it that way. His children probably never sang for him, or with him, or gave him anything that wasn't obligatory. Emma squeezed her mother's hand. "I've been reading the articles, Mom. Even the mean ones mention that David Cross's kids barely visited him, that they were always too busy. That sounds like people who feel guilty, trying to make someone else look guilty instead." Claire felt tears prick her eyes. "When did you get so smart?" "Sophomore year. It's required." The doorbell rang. They both froze. Through the frosted glass of the front door, Claire could see the silhouette of someone with a camera. Another reporter. "Don't answer it," Emma whispered. They sat in their kitchen, perfectly still, while the doorbell rang again and again. Finally, the person left, but Claire knew they'd be back. This story was too good. Dying billionaire, mysterious nurse, a song, a fortune. It had everything. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Ms. Hensley, this is James Cross. We need to talk. I can make this easier for you, or I can make it very, very difficult. Your choice. Call me." Claire stared at the message, then at Emma, then at their small kitchen with its outdated appliances and the crack in the ceiling they couldn't afford to fix. $500,000 would change everything, would save them. But she was starting to understand what David Cross had known. Some prices are too high, even when you need the money desperately. "What are you going to do?" Emma asked. "I don't know, honey. I honestly don't know." The lawyer Claire hired was named Thomas Reeves, and he looked exhausted before they even started talking. His office in downtown Charlotte was small, cramped with case files and a coffee maker that had clearly been working overtime. "I'll be honest with you, Ms. Hensley," Reeves said, pushing a document across his desk. "This is going to be ugly. The Cross family has retained Davidson and Shaw. That's one of the top litigation firms in the Southeast. They're going to argue undue influence, diminished capacity, and possibly fraud. I didn't defraud anyone. I believe you. But they'll argue that Mr. Cross was on morphine, that his judgment was impaired, that you knew exactly what you were doing when you sang for him." Reeves leaned back in his chair. "They've already filed a motion to freeze the assets pending the outcome of their challenge, and they're pushing for a quick trial date." Claire had driven to this meeting alone. Emma was at school, probably being asked questions by classmates who'd seen the news coverage. The story had spread beyond local news. CNN had picked it up yesterday. Billionaire's deathbed gift to Nurse Sparks' family war. That morning, before leaving for Reeves's office, Claire had made the mistake of reading the comments section on one of the articles. Big mistake. Gold Digger saw an opportunity and took it. Why would a dying billionaire give money to some random nurse unless she was manipulating him? "I'm a nurse and would never do this. She's making all of us look bad." But there were other comments too. Maybe she actually touched his heart. Rich people have feelings too. His kids hadn't visited in years, and now they're concerned about Dad's judgment. Please. Anyone who's been with a dying family member knows how powerful small acts of kindness can be. The internet had turned her life into a referendum, and everyone had an opinion. She'd stopped reading the articles. Half of them painted her as a hero, some kind of angel of mercy. The other half implied she was a con artist who'd manipulated a dying man. Neither version felt like her. "How long will this take?" Claire asked. "Months. Maybe a year. And it's going to cost you. I'm not cheap, and this kind of case requires a lot of preparation." Reeves leaned forward. "Discovery alone will be extensive. They'll depose you, your colleagues, anyone who had contact with Mr. Cross in his final days. They'll request your financial records, phone records, hospital shift schedules. They'll interview your friends, your family." "Emma." Claire felt her stomach drop. "They'll talk to Emma." "Probably. She was the first person you told about the inheritance. They'll want to know what you said, how you said it, whether you seemed surprised or expectant. She's 15 years old. I know, and if it helps, depositions of minors are handled carefully. But yes, she'll likely be involved." Reeves pulled out a legal pad. "Which is why we need to prepare you for what's coming. The Cross family isn't just fighting for money. They're fighting for their father's legacy and their own reputations. Right now, the narrative is that they're greedy children upset about losing their inheritance. They need to change that narrative. By destroying mine, by presenting you as calculating rather than compassionate." Reeves made a note. "They'll argue you researched David Cross before that night, that you knew his medical condition, his prognosis, his family situation, that you chose that song specifically because you knew it would manipulate his emotions." "That's insane. I didn't even know I'd be assigned to his floor that night." "Can you prove that?" Claire paused. "The hospital scheduling system, it's automated. Nurses are assigned based on patient needs and staff availability." "Good. We'll need documentation of that." Reeves made another note. "What about your relationship with the other staff who witnessed the will change? Can any of them testify that you seemed surprised by Mr. Cross's offer?" Claire thought back to that night. The other nurse, Keisha, had been standing outside the room. She'd given Claire a look afterward. Shock, maybe a little envy. "Keisha Morris. She was at the nurse's station when I left the room. I remember she asked me what happened, and I told her I didn't really know." "We'll talk to her." Reeves was writing quickly now. "Anyone else? Family members? Friends you called that night?" "No one. I didn't tell anyone until I got home to Emma the next morning." Claire felt the weight of that decision now. If she'd called someone, texted someone, documented her confusion in real time, she'd have proof of her mindset. But she'd been too stunned to think about evidence. "I don't have the money. That's the whole point. I don't have the inheritance yet." Reeves nodded. "I'm willing to work on contingency, 30% of whatever you end up receiving. But if we lose, you pay nothing. And if we win, you get $350,000, minus taxes, still life-changing money." Claire looked out the window at downtown Charlotte. Glass towers, busy streets, people going about their normal days. She wanted to be one of them again, anonymous, unburdened. She wanted to put on her scrubs, check her patients, do her rounds, come home and help Emma with homework. Simple, predictable, safe. But that life was gone. The moment she'd opened her mouth to sing, she'd crossed a threshold. There was no going back. "What are my chances?" "Honestly, 60-40 in your favor. Mr. Cross was documented as lucid. He had his lawyer present. The codicil was properly witnessed. But his children will bring in medical experts who'll testify about the effects of morphine, the emotional instability of end-stage cancer patients, the vulnerability to manipulation." Reeves drummed his fingers on the desk. "The real problem is optics. Jury sees a nurse who makes $50,000 a year suddenly getting $500,000 from a patient. They're going to wonder. And if we can't answer that wondering with something compelling, we lose. So what's compelling? The truth, but we need to present it right." Reeves pulled out another document. "I've been thinking about this. What made David Cross cry? It wasn't just the song. Lots of people can sing Amazing Grace. It was you, your story, your authenticity. The fact that you'd lost someone and knew what that final goodbye felt like. You want me to use Matt's death. I want you to tell the truth about why you sang what you sang, about what that song meant to you, about the moment you decided to give David Cross something real instead of something professional. So I should give it up. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you need to be prepared for what this fight looks like. Media scrutiny, depositions. They'll dig into your life, your finances, your history. Everything becomes evidence. Claire thought about her life being examined under a microscope. The credit card debt, the missed mortgage payment last year, the fact that she'd been picking up extra shifts before this happened, desperate for money. It would look exactly like what the Cross family was claiming, a desperate woman taking advantage of an opportunity. "There's something else," Reeves said. "I got a call from James Cross's attorney this morning. They want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" "Walk away quietly. Sign a statement saying you misunderstood Mr. Cross's intentions. In exchange, they'll give you $50,000 and a confidentiality agreement. 10%. They were offering her 10% to disappear. What happens if I take it?" "You get some money. Not enough to be life-changing, but enough to help. No trial, no media circus, no risk. You go back to your life." And I admit I was wrong. The statement would be carefully worded, but essentially yes. Claire stood and walked to the window. Below, traffic moved through the intersection at Trade and Tryon. Red light, green light, yellow, simple rules, everyone knowing what to do. "Can I think about it?" "They want an answer by Friday, 4 days. When Claire got home, there was a package on her porch. No return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "Ms. Hensley, you don't know me, but I worked for David Cross for 15 years. I was his executive assistant. There are things you should know about his family before you make any decisions. The files on this drive are copies of emails and documents I kept. David asked me to hold on to them in case they were ever needed. I think they're needed now. Margaret Thornton." Claire stared at the USB drive. This felt like crossing a line, like going from victim to participant. But she was already a participant. The moment she'd sung, she'd become part of the story. She plugged the drive into her laptop. The files were organized by year and by child. Victoria, James, Michael. Each folder contained email chains, financial records, private investigator reports. Claire started reading, and with each document, the picture became clearer and uglier. Victoria had been embezzling from Cross Media for 3 years. Small amounts, carefully hidden in consulting fees to companies she controlled. David had known. He'd hired investigators but never pressed charges. The last email in her folder was from David to his lawyer. "She's still my daughter. I won't destroy her. But I won't let her destroy what I built either." James had been planning a hostile takeover. He'd been meeting with board members, building alliances, waiting for David to die so he could force through a sale of the company. David's notes on the documents. "He doesn't understand that some things matter more than stock prices. He never did." Michael's folder was the saddest. Failed business ventures, all funded by David. Rehab stays, a DUI conviction that David had made disappear with money and influence. The last document was a letter from Michael to his father, never sent. "I know you think I'm a disappointment. You're right. But I wish just once you'd tell me you love me anyway." Claire closed the laptop. She felt sick. These weren't the angry, greedy villains the media was portraying. They were broken people, shaped by a man who'd been too busy building an empire to build a family. And David had known it, had documented it, had maybe even enabled it. Her phone rang. Thomas Reeves. "Claire, We have a problem. The Cross family just filed an emergency motion. They're claiming you had prior knowledge of the will, that Margaret Thornton gave you information about the family finances. They're saying it was all planned. Margaret Thornton just gave me files today. I didn't know her before. They're saying she was working with you, that you approached Mr. Cross deliberately, knowing he was vulnerable and wealthy. That's insane. I know, but they're painting a picture, and right now, it's a convincing one. Margaret Thornton disappeared yesterday. No one can find her, and now you have files that conveniently show the family in a bad light. Claire felt the walls closing in. What do I do? You need to decide if this fight is worth it, because it's about to get a lot worse. That night, Emma found Claire sitting in the dark in their living room. Mom? I'm okay, honey. Emma sat down next to her. No, you're not. They sat in silence for a while. Then Claire said, your father would know what to do. He always knew what to do. Dad would tell you to do what's right. I don't know what that is anymore. Emma took her hand. Yes, you do. You sang for that man because he needed something real, not because of the money. You didn't even believe he'd actually give it to you. But I'm keeping it, or trying to. That makes it about the money. No, it makes it about not letting them bully you into saying you did something wrong when you didn't. Claire looked at her daughter, 15 years old and already wiser than she should have to be. When did you grow up? Claire asked. I had a good teacher. On Friday morning, Claire called Thomas Reeves. I'm not taking their offer, she said. I want to fight. There was a pause. Then, you're sure? No, but I'm doing it anyway. All right then, let's get to work. The trial date was set for September, 3 months away. 3 months of preparation, of media attention, of living in limbo. But Claire had made her decision. She'd sung for David Cross because he'd asked for something true. Now she was going to fight for the same reason. Not because she was noble, not because she was a hero, but because sometimes the only way forward is through the fire, and you just have to trust you'll come out the other side. The courtroom in Mecklenburg County was smaller than Claire had imagined. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, uncomfortable chairs. Nothing like the dramatic courtrooms on TV, just a functional space where real people's lives got decided. September arrived with that particular North Carolina heat that feels like breathing through a wet towel. Claire wore a simple blue dress. Thomas Reeves had insisted on looking professional, but not expensive. We want the jury to see you as one of them, he'd said. Across the aisle sat Victoria, James, and Michael Cross. Victoria wore black, appropriately mournful. James had his Wall Street armor on, expensive suit, blank expression. Michael looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. The jury selection had taken 2 days. 12 people, 7 women and 5 men, ages ranging from mid-20s to late 60s. They would decide if Claire had manipulated a dying man or simply given him a moment of grace. The Cross family's attorney, William Davidson, was everything Claire had feared. Silver-haired, commanding presence, voice like smooth bourbon. He opened by painting a picture of a vulnerable man in his final hours, medicated and emotional, and a nurse who saw an opportunity. David Cross built an empire through intelligence and hard work, Davidson told the jury. But in his final days, that intelligence was compromised by pain medication, by the reality of his impending death, by the emotional vulnerability we all experience when facing the end. And Ms. Hensley exploited that vulnerability. He walked them through the timeline. David's diagnosis, his deteriorating condition, his admission to Presbyterian Hospital, Claire's assignment to his floor, the evening of the will change. She knew he was wealthy. She knew he was dying. She knew he was on morphine, a powerful narcotic that affects judgment and emotional control. And when the opportunity presented itself, she took it. She sang a song calculated to manipulate a dying man's emotions, and she walked away with $500,000. Davidson was good. Claire felt the jury's eyes on her, evaluating, judging. Then it was Thomas Reeves's turn. He stood slowly, deliberately. He didn't have Davidson's polish, but he had something else: sincerity. David Cross was a lot of things, Reeves began. Successful, powerful, wealthy. But at the end, he was something more important. He was human, and he was lonely. Reeves walked the jury through David's life, the business triumphs, the personal failures, 3 marriages, all ending in divorce, 3 children he'd provided for financially but failed emotionally. The night of September 12th, David Cross made a choice, not because he was confused, not because he was manipulated, but because for once in his final days, someone gave him something that wasn't about his money or his power. Someone gave him 3 minutes of honesty. The trial lasted 6 days. Dr. Patterson testified that David had been lucid, that the morphine dosage wasn't high enough to impair judgment. "I've been treating terminal patients for 23 years, he said on the stand. I know the difference between someone whose mind is going and someone who's simply tired of pretense. Mr. Cross was the latter." Martin Schaefer, David's attorney, described their conversation about the will change. He was absolutely clear about what he was doing. He said, "Finally, someone who isn't performing for me." Schaefer's voice was steady, professional, but there was something else underneath. I asked him 3 times if he was certain. 3 times he said yes. The last time he said, "Martin, I've made a lot of bad decisions in my life. This isn't one of them." On the second day, they called Keisha Morris, the nurse who'd been on duty with Claire that night. She wore a navy blazer that looked borrowed, kept smoothing her skirt. She told Claire in the hallway during the morning recess that her hands hadn't stopped shaking since she got the subpoena. Thomas Reeves guided her through the basics: her role at the hospital, her shift that night, her position at the nurses' station. "What did you observe about Ms. Hensley's behavior that evening?" Reeves asked. She was professional, careful. Mr. Cross's vitals had been unstable all day, and Claire was monitoring him closely. She checked on him every 20 minutes, sometimes more. "Did she seem interested in Mr. Cross beyond his medical care?" "No more than any of us. He was—" Keisha paused, choosing her words. "He was a nice man, funny, even when he was in pain. He'd joke with us, ask about our families. We all liked him. Claire liked him. But it wasn't anything inappropriate. It was just human." "Did you hear what happened in room 408 that evening around 8:30 p.m.? Keisha's expression softened. "I heard singing. I was at the nurses' station updating charts, and I heard someone singing. It was beautiful, really beautiful. It stopped me completely. I looked up and realized it was coming from Mr. Cross's room." "What did you do?" "I stood up, walked closer to the door. I didn't want to interrupt. It felt—" She struggled for the word. "Sacred, almost, like I was hearing something private and important." "Could you hear what was being sung?" "Amazing Grace." I recognized it immediately. My grandmother used to sing it. Same slow version, almost like a lullaby. "What happened after the singing stopped?" "There was silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then Claire came out. She looked—" Keisha looked directly at Claire. She looked shaken. Her eyes were wet. Her hands were trembling. I asked if everything was okay, and she said— Keisha paused, remembering. She said, "I don't know what just happened, Keisha. I really don't know." She seemed confused. She seemed like something big had just occurred, and she was trying to process it, like she'd been part of something she didn't fully understand yet. Davidson rose for cross-examination. "Ms. Morris, you and Ms. Hensley are colleagues. Friends?" "Colleagues? Yes, we've worked together for 6 years. Close colleagues?" "We're friendly. We're not best friends, if that's what you're asking." "But you'd want to help her, wouldn't you?" "I'd want to tell the truth, even if that truth hurt your friend." Keisha's jaw tightened. Something shifted in her expression, from nervous witness to protective colleague. Especially then. The truth is, Claire is one of the best nurses I know. She cares about her patients, really cares. Not for money or recognition, just because it's right. And that night, she gave Mr. Cross something he needed. I don't know if it was worth $500,000. That's not for me to say. But I know it was real. Davidson tried another angle. You said Miss Hensley looked shaken when she left the room. Shaken with excitement, with anticipation of a large payment. No! Keisha's voice was firm. Shaken, like someone who'd just poured their heart out and wasn't sure if they should have. The Cross family brought their own experts. A psychiatrist who explained how terminal illness creates emotional instability. A forensic accountant who detailed Claire's financial struggles, the maxed-out credit cards, the second mortgage, the medical bills from Matt's cancer treatment 4 years earlier. They brought in Dr. Raymond Shah, David's oncologist, who testified about pain management and cognitive effects. And they brought in an expert on elder abuse, a woman named Dr. Patricia Vance, who specialized in financial exploitation. Vulnerable adults are particularly susceptible to manipulation, Dr. Vance testified. When someone is facing death, their judgment can be impaired not by medication but by fear, loneliness, and the desperate need for connection. A skilled manipulator can exploit those needs. And would you consider a nurse singing an emotionally charged song to a dying patient a form of manipulation? Davidson asked. It could be, depending on intent. If the nurse knew the patient was wealthy and emotionally vulnerable, if she deliberately chose a song designed to trigger an emotional response, if she created an atmosphere of intimacy in order to influence the patient's decisions, yes, that would constitute manipulation. Thomas Reeves's cross-examination was brief. Dr. Vance, were you present in room 408 the night in question? No. Have you reviewed Ms. Hensley's employment record? Her history with patients, her character references? No, I was asked to provide general expert testimony about elder financial abuse. So you can't speak to Ms. Hensley's intent that night? No. You can't speak to whether Mr. Cross initiated the interaction or Ms. Hensley did? No. You can't speak to whether the song was calculated or spontaneous? No. So your testimony is theoretical, not specific to this case. Dr. Vance hesitated. It's applicable to the general circumstances, but not to these specific people in this specific moment. No. She needed money, Davidson argued in his closing preview, desperately, and she found it. On the 4th day, they called Claire to the stand. Davidson started gently. Her background, her nursing career, her husband's death from lymphoma in 2021. Then he tightened the noose. You were struggling financially, weren't you, Ms. Hensley? We were managing. Managing? You were 60 days behind on your mortgage. You'd been working double shifts for months. Your daughter's college fund was empty. A lot of people struggle with money. That doesn't make them criminals. But it does create motive, doesn't it? When Mr. Cross offered you $500,000, that must have seemed like a miracle. I didn't think he was serious. Really? A man says, I'll give you $500,000 if you sing something that moves me, and you didn't think he was serious? Claire met his eyes. I thought he was a lonely man asking for a moment of connection. Yes, he mentioned money, but that's not why I sang. Then why did you? Because he asked, and because I understood what it felt like to need something real when everything is falling apart. Davidson paused. You understood because of your husband. Yes. You sang Amazing Grace, the same song you attempted to sing at your husband's funeral, but couldn't finish. Claire's throat tightened. Yes, so you used your own grief to manipulate Mr. Cross's emotions. No, Claire stopped, found the words. I sang what I felt, that's all. He wanted something honest, and I gave it to him. And walked away with $500,000. I didn't walk away with anything yet. That's why we're here. The courtroom was silent. Davidson smiled slightly. He'd gotten what he wanted. Claire looking defensive, sharp, uncomfortable. When Thomas Reeves cross-examined her, his questions were simpler. Claire, why did you become a nurse? To help people. Did helping people include expecting payment from terminal patients? No, never. In 11 years at Presbyterian Hospital, have you ever accepted gifts from patients or their families? No. Hospital policy doesn't allow it except for small tokens. Did you know David Cross's will situation before that night? No. Did you plan to sing for him before he asked? No. So what happened in room 408 that night was spontaneous? Completely. And when you sang, what were you thinking about? Claire took a breath. I was thinking about my husband, about how much I missed him, about how music used to help me process grief, but I'd shut it out after he died, and about Mr. Cross, who was going through his own version of losing everything, and how maybe for 3 minutes I could give him something that mattered. Did you sing well? Claire almost smiled. I don't know. I wasn't thinking about technique. Did it move you? Yes. Why? Because I meant every word. Reeves let that sit for a moment. Then, no further questions. The Cross children testified. Victoria described her father's erratic behavior in his final weeks. James talked about morphine dosages and diminished capacity. Michael broke down on the stand, describing how much he'd loved his father, despite everything. It was effective, painful, human. On the 6th day, Thomas Reeves called his final witness, Emma Hensley. Claire hadn't wanted this, had argued against it, but Reeves insisted, the jury needs to understand who you are, and Emma can show them. Emma wore a simple dress, her hair pulled back. She looked young and scared and brave. Reeves kept it brief, asked about their life after Matt died, the struggles, how Claire had worked extra shifts to keep them afloat, how they'd managed. Did your mother ever talk about David Cross before the night she sang for him? No. Did she come home that night expecting to inherit money? She came home confused. She didn't understand what had happened. What did she tell you? That she'd sung for a dying man who looked lonely and that he'd done something unexpected. Did she seem happy about the money? Emma paused. She seemed scared. Why scared? Because she knew it would change things. And my mom doesn't like change. She likes knowing what to expect. Davidson's cross-examination was gentle. You couldn't attack a 15-year-old without looking like a monster. But he planted seeds. You and your mother need money, don't you? We're okay. But college is expensive, and this money would help. Yes. So you hope your mother wins this case. I hope people see the truth, which is that my mom is a good person who helped someone when they asked for help, that's all. The closing arguments came on day 7. Davidson was masterful. Talked about precedent, about protecting vulnerable people, about the danger of allowing medical professionals to benefit from their patients. Reeves was quieter. David Cross spent his life being surrounded by people who wanted something from him. His children wanted their inheritance. His business partners wanted deals. His employees wanted promotions. And at the end, in his final days, he was still surrounded by people performing grief, performing love, performing care. Then a nurse sang a song. Not for money, she didn't believe he'd actually give it to her, not for advantage, but because a dying man asked for something real, and she was honest enough to give it to him. The Cross family wants you to believe that was manipulation. I think it was humanity, and I think David Cross, who spent his life building an empire but failed to build a family, recognized the difference. The jury deliberated for 14 hours across 2 days. When they came back, the forewoman was a woman in her 50s named Patricia Rogers. She'd been a middle school teacher for 30 years. In the matter of cross-family trust versus Claire Hensley, on the question of whether the codicil to David Cross's will was made under undue influence, we find for the defendant, Claire Hensley. Claire felt her legs nearly give out. Thomas Reeves grabbed her arm to steady her. On the question of whether David Cross possessed mental capacity at the time of the will change, we find that he did. On all counts, we find for the defendant. The courtroom erupted. Victoria stood and walked out without looking back. James followed, his face unreadable. Michael stayed seated, staring at his hands. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. Thomas Reeves guided Claire through a side door into a small conference room. "We won," he said. "We won," Claire repeated, but it felt hollow. The money came through 6 weeks later. After legal fees and taxes, Claire received $347,000, enough to pay off the mortgage, to fund Emma's college, to stop working double shifts, life-changing money. But Claire found herself thinking about David Cross more than she expected, about the empire he'd built and the emptiness he'd felt, about 3 children who'd never learned how to grieve their father properly because they'd never learned how to love him properly. One day in November, 3 months after the trial, Claire was at the grocery store when she ran into Michael Cross. He looked different, thinner, older. He was buying a single bag of coffee. They stood in the aisle awkwardly. "I'm sorry," Michael said finally, "for what my family put you through. You don't have to apologize." "Yes, I do. My father was right about us. We were strangers, still are, probably." He smiled sadly. "I listened to you testify. About your husband, about grief. I understood what my father heard that night. Michael, he left us each $1. Did you know that? Not because he hated us, because he wanted us to understand that we'd already taken everything that mattered." Michael's eyes were wet. "I wish I'd sung for him, not for money, just to connect, even once." He walked away before Claire could respond. That night, Claire did something she hadn't done in years. She drove to the church where she and Matt had been married. It was empty, dark, except for the altar candles. She stood in the sanctuary and sang "Amazing Grace," the same song she'd sung for David Cross, the same song she'd broken down trying to sing at Matt's funeral. This time, she finished it, every verse, her voice echoing in the empty space. When she was done, she sat in the front pew and cried, for Matt, for David, for Michael and his siblings who'd lost their father years before he died, for the strange weight of grace, given and received. Emma found her there an hour later. She'd tracked her mom's location on her phone, worried when Claire hadn't come home. "Mom," Claire wiped her eyes. "I'm okay." "You're crying. Sometimes that's part of being okay." They sat together in the quiet church. Then Emma asked, "Do you think Mr. Cross was happy in the end?" Claire thought about his tears, about the peace in his expression after she'd finished singing, about his final words, "Thank you." "Yes," she said, "I think for 3 minutes he was. Because of you. Because he asked for something real, and I was there to give it. That's not random, Mom. That's who you are." They drove home through Charlotte's streets, past the hospital where it had all started, past the courthouse where it had all ended, past the ordinary places where ordinary people lived ordinary lives. Claire had $347,000 in her bank account, had her job back at Presbyterian. They'd called 2 days after the verdict, offering to reinstate her with full back pay and a carefully worded apology for the difficult circumstances. Had her daughter safe and loved and preparing for college applications. She'd won. The next morning, Claire did something that surprised even herself. She called Thomas Reeves and asked him to help her set up a scholarship fund. The David Cross Compassionate Care Scholarship for nursing students from low-income families at UNC Charlotte. She funded it with $50,000, 10% of what she'd received. "You don't have to do this," Reeves had said. "I know. but it feels right. David gave me money because something I did mattered to him. Maybe this can matter to someone else. Emma had been the one to suggest it, actually. Over breakfast, scrambled eggs and toast, her daughter had said, "Mom, what if you use some of it to help other people become nurses, like people who want to help but can't afford school?" Smart kid, getting smarter every day. The scholarship would give 2 students full tuition every year. It wouldn't change the world, but it might change 2 worlds. And maybe that was enough. But winning, she'd learned, wasn't about the money. It was about standing in a hospital room and choosing honesty over calculation. About singing a song because it needed to be sung, not because of what it might earn. About remembering that grace costs nothing and everything, and that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone is simply the truth of your presence. David Cross had built an empire worth $4 billion. In the end, the only thing that moved him was 3 minutes of honest humanity. That, Claire thought as she pulled into her driveway, was the lesson worth inheriting. Emma helped her make dinner. They talked about normal things, school, homework, whether Jake Morrison was worth the crush. Claire's verdict, probably not, but Emma would figure that out on her own. And in the quiet moments between conversation, Claire hummed. Old hymns, half-remembered melodies, songs her grandmother had taught her. The music had returned, and with it, finally, a kind of peace that didn't come from winning or losing, from money or justice, but from knowing she'd done something true in a moment when truth mattered. Sometimes that's all grace is, a moment of truth when someone needed it most. And sometimes, impossibly, it's enough.